You know, Man on Fire, it's just one of those movies. It's brutal, it's stylish, and it absolutely sticks with you. But I think there's way more to it than just a revenge flick. So today, we're going to dig in and really take apart what makes this film a true masterpiece.
I mean, come on, this line, delivered by Christopher Walken, it's everything. It sets the stage for the whole second half of the film. We just watched Denzel as John Creasy unleash this absolute storm of vengeance. It's so creative in its brutality that, yeah, you kind of have to call it a dark form of art.
But here's the thing. What if that's not the masterpiece? What if it's not the body count? That's what we're going to get into. We're going to peel back the layers of this cult classic and make the case that its real power, well, it's in a story of an obsession, connection, and in the end, redemption.
All right, so where do we even start with this? Well, you have to start with the man behind the camera, the late, great Tony Scott. Because for him, Man on Fire wasn't just another movie. It was, believe it or not, a personal mission.
Yeah, no joke. We're talking a 20-year obsession. See, Tony Scott was supposed to direct this film way back in 1983. This was right after he made his super stylish debut, The Hunger. But the studio, they basically said, nah, you're too green for this, and passed him over. So he had to wait. And get this, another version of the movie was made in 1987. And it was not good. But Tony Scott, he never gave up on it. He held on to this thing for 2 full decades before he finally, in 2003, got to make his version, the one we're all obsessed with.
And this part is gonna blow your mind. The search for the perfect Creasy. Back in the 80s, Scott's #1 pick was Marlon Brando. Fast forward to the 2000s, and the list is just as wild. De Niro, Gene Hackman, Bruce Willis, even Will Smith was considered. It's crazy to think that Denzel, who is just so definitive in the role, wasn't the first guy on the list. The movie could have been so different.
Okay, so you have the director's obsession and the perfect star locked in. But honestly, none of that works if you don't nail the absolute heart of the film, that bond between a totally broken man and the little girl who basically saves his soul. And honestly, Denzel Washington said it perfectly. Creasy is just gone. His heart is completely closed off. He's this ex-CIA guy, drinking himself to death, he has totally given up. And then this little girl, Pita, played by an incredible Dakota Fanning, she just keeps chipping away at that wall until she gets in. So how do you make that feel real? Well, Tony Scott had this kind of genius move. He decided to shoot most of their scenes in order, and Denzel, he actually kept his distance from Dakota Fanning at the beginning of the shoot, to match Creasy's coldness. So as they filmed more and more, their real-life bond grew right alongside the on-screen one. It created this authentic chemistry you just can't script. And here's the absolute best example of that chemistry. You know that perfect little moment where Pita catches Creasy smiling for the very first time? Totally improvised. That wasn't in the script at all. That was just Denzel and Dakota having a real moment. And it's one of the most powerful scenes in the film. It's proof that their connection was the real deal. And then, it all gets ripped away. Pita is kidnapped, that bond is shattered, and the entire movie just flips a switch. We are thrown headfirst into Creasy's broken mind, all thanks to Tony Scott's insane, signature style, something folks called Tony Vision. And let's be clear, this wasn't just style for style's sake. It wasn't just to look cool. All that frantic editing, the shaky camera, the weird visuals, every single bit of it was designed to put you, the viewer, right inside Creasy's head. You're meant to feel his panic, his rage, his paranoia. I mean, he pulled out all the stops. He used these old-school hand-cranked cameras to give it this frantic energy. He was messing with the frame rates, so time itself feels like it's bending. The subtitles on screen, they weren't just text, they were a visual character, pulsing with the film's energy. He even built a rig to literally spin Denzel and the camera around to make you feel that dizzying panic of the kidnapping. Just wild stuff. But all that cinematic chaos, it was mirroring something terrifyingly real. And that's because the film's setting, yeah, that was no accident.
So the movie opens with this incredibly chilling statistic, right? 1 kidnapping every 60 minutes in Latin America. Now look, that number was probably ramped up a bit for the movies, but it was pointing to a very, very real crisis that was happening at the time.
What's really interesting is that the book the movie is based on, it was set in Italy. It was all about mafia kidnappings back in the 70s and 80s. But Tony Scott was smart. He knew that would feel dated, so he moved the whole story to Mexico City. which in the early 2000s had become the world's new kidnapping capital. It made the threat feel immediate. It made it feel now.
And changing the location? Oh, that was just scratching the surface. The film takes some huge liberties with the original book, which, by the way, is way, way darker.
Okay, just look at how different we're talking. In the book, Pita, she doesn't make it. She's found murdered. It's brutal. And Creasy, he survives and goes on to star in a whole series of sequels. The movie makes two gigantic changes. Pita lives, and Creasy gets this noble warrior's death. It's a complete shift in the story's meaning.
And it almost went another way. They actually storyboarded an ending where Creasy survives that final standoff on the bridge. He would have gone on to kill the main bad guy with a watch bomb like some James Bond move. But they didn't do it. They chose the heartbreaking, poetic ending that we all remember, and that choice is everything.
So this is where it all comes together. The director's 20-year wait, the focus on building a real bond, those massive changes to the ending. When you put all those pieces on the table, you start to see what Tony Scott was really trying to say. It's funny, when Man on Fire was released, critics were not impressed. They mostly saw it as too violent, too over the top, and they gave it a pretty bad score. But audiences had a completely different reaction. They got it. They felt the emotion behind the violence, and they turned it into a huge cult classic. They saw something the critics just didn't.
And what they saw was what Tony Scott intended all along. For him, this was never, ever just a revenge movie. The violence was just the setting. The real story was about redemption. It was about a man who is already dead inside, who finds one single reason to live again because of his love for a child.
And you don't have to take my word for it. These are Tony Scott's own words about John Creasy. He said, "He was the lost sheep who was finally found." He didn't see a killer. He saw a man who was lost and then found, and who then chose to give up his own life to save the one good thing in it.
So that brings us all the way back to the beginning. Is a man's masterpiece his art of death, or is it his act of sacrifice? Creasy's art might have been death, but his masterpiece? The masterpiece Tony Scott spent 20 years trying to paint? That was his redemption.